Information is pretty much the lifeblood of public safety. But what happens when that information gets twisted, or worse, doesn't even show up at all? Today, we're going to get into that. The critical and, let's be honest, often messy relationship between the media, the message, and the fire service. This quote from the NFPA really hits the nail on the head. The tragedies we're about to look at, they aren't about some brand new, unforeseen problem. Nope. They're about figuring out why we keep failing to act on the lessons we should have learned a long, long time ago. So here's our game plan. We'll start by talking about why having an informed public is so critical for safety. Then we're diving into 3 huge case studies where the flow of information was a total game changer. The controlled message after 9/11, the communication breakdown during the Camp Fire, and how journalism acted like a fire alarm in Chicago. All right, first up, let's lay the groundwork. Why do we care so much about information in the fire service? I mean, it's more than just news reports, right? It's a fundamental piece of the whole public safety machine. So check this out. The NFPA has this thing called the Fire and Life Safety Ecosystem. It's got 8 key parts that all have to work together for a community to be safe. Things like code enforcement, emergency response, you know the drill. But look at this one right here, an informed public. It's not just some afterthought. It's a foundational cog in the machine. If people don't have good, timely info, they can't protect themselves, and the whole system starts to wobble. This is the idea we're going to see put to the test. Let's get into our first case, and you'll see exactly how this can go wrong. We're going to New York City, right after September 11th, and this story isn't about a lack of information. It's about what happens when the official information, blasted out by the media, is actively controlled, and the consequences are just devastating. Just let that quote sink in. We don't know what the hell we just swallowed. That's from a first responder at Ground Zero. It's so visceral. It just perfectly captures what it was like to be on that pile, breathing that air and totally depending on the official word to know if you were safe. They were literally inside a toxic storm, but the message they were hearing was something else entirely. I mean, look at this timeline. It's wild. Just 2 days after the attacks, based on only 10 air samples, the EPA declares the air is safe to breathe. By September 18th, the head of the whole agency is on TV giving these sweeping reassurances, a message the media, of course, runs with. But then you contrast that quick, confident message with the brutal reality that unfolded for years and years as thousands of responders got incredibly, life-alteringly sick. So what was actually in that safe air? Well, it wasn't just dust. It was this toxic soup of more than 2,500 contaminants. We're talking a nightmare cocktail of things known to cause cancer, things that do permanent damage to your body. Asbestos, benzene, lead, mercury. This was the reality they were breathing in every single day. So you have to ask, why? Why the huge disconnect? Well, this quote from a White House source pretty much spells it out. The Council on Environmental Quality, the CEQ, wanted to protect national security and, this is the key part, get Wall Street reopened. Those were the priorities driving the message, not the science. And that's the bottom line from this first case. The whole information pipeline was basically hijacked. Policy, politics, economic concerns, those things shaped the message that was fed to the public, and most tragically, to the men and women on the pile. The media just became the messenger for a story that simply wasn't true. Okay, let's pivot to our second case. We're going to go from a message that was deliberately controlled to a situation where the message just completely fell apart. This is the 2018 Camp Fire in California. It's a story of a total communication collapse when faced with a disaster nobody saw coming. Just try to wrap your head around this number for a second. 7.5 miles in 90 minutes. To put that into perspective, that's a rate of about 80 football fields every single minute. This thing wasn't just a fire, it was a firestorm, and it was moving way faster than any system could possibly track or warn people about. And this created this absolutely terrifying gap between information and reality. On one side, you have dispatchers hearing from CAL FIRE that the fire is still miles north of the town of Paradise. That's the official intel. But on the other side, you've got residents frantically calling 911, saying there are ashes falling on my house right now. The official information just couldn't keep up. And this wasn't just one single failure, it was a total systemic collapse. The code red alert system, it only went to the folks who had opted in, which was less than half the town. Cell towers got fried, so the network was clogged. The evacuation plan was built for a small, slow fire, not this monster. And maybe most critically, the firefighters were so deep in rescue mode, they had no way to radio back intel about where the fire was. It created this information vacuum, and inside that vacuum, disaster struck. So, we've seen the media as a co-opted messenger and as part of a system that just broke. Now let's look at a third role, the media as an independent watchdog, the one sounding an alarm that officials would really rather just ignore. This is the story of a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation out of Chicago. This is the human cost at the heart of the story. An investigation by the Better Government Association and the Chicago Tribune found that between 2014 and 2019, at least 61 people died in fires in buildings where city officials already knew there were serious fire safety problems and just hadn't done anything in time. So the journalists, they dug into the data, and what they found was just staggering. In predominantly non-white areas, the rate of serious fire safety violations was more than 4 times higher. And because the volume was so high, you had over 69,000 serious violations just sitting there unfixed. That's 10 times the number in predominantly white areas. This wasn't bad luck. It was a clear, systemic pattern of unequal risk.
And when the journalists brought these explosive findings to the city, what was the official response? Pretty much a shrug. The mayor at the time called it an interesting historical piece. This is such a classic example of the kind of pushback investigative journalism gets, and it's exactly why we need that independent watchdog role. Without it, these patterns just stay buried.
The investigation didn't just point out a problem, it diagnosed the flaw in the system. See, Chicago was using a reactive system. It waited for tenants to complain to 311. That lets dangerous problems fester for years. The journalists contrasted this with proactive systems in places like Minneapolis and LA, where they do routine scheduled inspections to find problems before they turn into a tragedy. The media basically held up a mirror and said, here's what's wrong and here's how you could fix it. Okay, so we've looked at 3 really different situations, right? A controlled message, a broken system, and journalism sounding an alarm. So what's the big takeaway here for us, for professionals in the fire service? The best way to think about this is like an information to action pipeline. It's got to work in order. Step 1, you have to gather accurate data. Step 2, you've got to communicate that information clearly. Step 3, the public has to be able to take protective action based on it. And step 4, the systems have to be held accountable. Now think about where our case studies broke. 9/11, it broke at step 1. The data was bad. The Camp Fire, it broke at step 2. Communication completely collapsed. And in Chicago, it broke at step 4. There was zero accountability until the media forced the issue. And that really brings it all home to this final crucial question. It's one thing to look at these massive disasters, but we've got to apply these lessons where we live. So, in your community, who's the watchdog? Who's checking the facts? Who makes sure the system actually works before a crisis hits? As fire professionals, we are a huge part of that information pipeline, and really understanding where it can break is absolutely essential if we're going to prevent the next tragedy.